Hi, this is Paul. We had our meetup on Tuesday night, and I heard something there that I had been hearing from other people. I was talking to some friends, and they were sort of complaining. They can't find any interesting podcasts or YouTube videos to listen to. Now, it's just a fact that many of you who listen to my podcast, your life is arranged in such a way that YouTube and podcasts are a very big part of it. That's been true of me for a long time. I started listening to podcasts when I started listening to the Twit Network, Leo Laporte and tech podcasts. I was subscribed to 10 or 15 tech podcasts at one time, listening to most of them. I did that at a time in my life when things were stressful for other reasons, and I wanted something that I was interested in enough to listen to, but not too interested in to necessarily keep me from driving safely or falling asleep at night. And, over time, eventually I found Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson sort of brought me onto YouTube, and I sort of got into the YouTube space. And like many of you, when I found Jordan Peterson, he sort of grabbed my attention, and I voraciously consumed. Not only he was doing his biblical series at that point, or I don't even remember exactly where he was in that, but doing the biblical series. And then I found his other college lectures, and I just devoured them. And I found that to be just a heady experience. It's something like when Neo in the Matrix, they plug him in, and suddenly he's in this virtual room and able to do stuff. And in some ways, that was sort of the rush of that for Jordan Peterson. Before that, I'd used YouTube to people would have a video linked, or I wasn't done. I didn't appreciate YouTube as a social media before that. But once I got onto that, then Jordan Peterson led me to other IDW members, and then I started making videos, and here we are today. So when I heard my friends complaining that they couldn't find anything interesting to watch on YouTube, and some people, well, except for your stuff, Paul. Okay, um, I that caught my attention. And then at the meetup on Tuesday night, somebody said, everything on YouTube is boring, and I thought, well, that's interesting. What's going on? Why is everything on YouTube boring? Why is there nothing to watch on TV? So I have Netflix and Amazon Prime, and because I have AT&T, I have HBO Go, and then my kids are subscribed to other networks. So my Roku box, I'm the only one left in my family that still knows how to work the Direct TV. And the only reason I have Direct TV is because I was going to cancel it. And they called me and said, well, is it price? I said, no, not really. They said, how cheap can you get us to stay? I said, you're going to have to compete with free. Well, it's almost free, and that way I don't lose my connection to another one of my guilty pleasures, which is the Oak Island, the Curse of Oak Island, which it's a big tease, I know, but I can't get enough of it. And I also binge watched Cobra Kai last weekend, which was sort of interesting. But sometimes my wife and I, at the end of the day, will sit down on the sofa and we will have sort of caught up over our days, and then want to, watch a little bit of TV before we head off to bed. And nothing to watch, and I think, well, look at Netflix. Well, look at Amazon Prime. On and on and on and on, and there's never been more. And now Google has a new Chromecast that is going to try to take from all the services, even Netflix, and put it into one feed based on the algorithmic ranking of watching what you're watching and enjoying, and trying to get you to consume more content, because of course that's exactly what YouTube and Apple do. And well, what? Well, we're drowning in content now more than ever before. Why is it that we find nothing that interests us? So in a sense, we've sort of created this hierarchy, and well, it's sort of like we're playing chicken with this hierarchy, and they keep putting more in front of us, and we put more. And this surprises me. I grew up in the New York metropolitan area. So in terms of the United States, we had one of the biggest media markets. We had more, this was before cable TV, we had more TV channels than anyone else. We had ABC, NBC, CBS. We had Channel 5 and Channel 9 and Channel 11 and PBS on Channel 13. And, well, we just sit in front of TV and watched what was on. And now there's nothing on TV. What do you mean there's nothing on TV? And then you go to YouTube, and I mean, how many hours, thousands of hours of content are recorded and uploaded to YouTube every minute? So why is YouTube boring? Why is there nothing there to catch our interest? What's going on? Because it's not just on YouTube. Some of it is, I'm sure, but it's also in us. So what's going on with it? Well, I'd really love to hear what you have to think. And so put your comment below, because I'm very interested in what your thoughts are, because of what I've been doing for the last couple of days is asking this of a lot of people, not online, but just personally. One of the factors, Rebel Wisdom and their whole space has been sense making. And there's a lot of truth to that. And part of the reason, and we're seeing that especially now in my prayer for the elections, which was not answered, was that whoever gets elected, may it be clear and obvious to everyone so that we can at least preserve the system. And it's like, my prayer was not answered. Part of this is, and we talked about this in the meetup, because mass media is dying. It's not dead yet. You can still create a huge platform, or if you're on mass media, that helps your platform. And the platforms still have quite a bit of power. But, when I was growing up, we had the three major networks, and then cable TV came along, and then you had the proliferation of cable news. That's when, of course, Neil Postman was writing. And now with the internet, with YouTube, you just have all the micromedias. Social media is really a micromedia. And so the narrative is fragmented. Everyone yesterday posted to me Ibram Kendi's piece on The Atlantic. And I was reading a very interesting article about missions from Ralph D. Winter, and I was reading it, and I was just thinking, the power of a historian to recast our past is enormously powerful, because basically what we do is you think that the past is set, far from it. Read history. The past is very much alive, and we keep recasting it every day. So what this means is that, and this was a point brought up by Tyler at the meetup, that our value hierarchies, we are so bombarded with facts that, and Google knew this a while ago, that now suddenly the filter is key, because there's no end of facts that we are presented with. And again, looking at all my other videos, we as limited creatures are simply unable to process the vast world of facts before us. And so you need a sorting mechanism. And so really what's at play, this is where I get into God being both agentic and arenic. What's at play is that these platforms have now become sorting mechanisms. And that's enormously powerful, because it's one thing to present two views and then try to influence someone between them. It's a whole nother thing to blot out all the other views and present one idea, and you sort of leave your little sense makers helpless before you, because what are you supposed to know? So now, to the degree that we are bombarded with facts, our value hierarchies, our value assumptions, these in a sense internalized platforms within us, are the ones that then select. So which is the case with Joe Biden versus Donald Trump now after Election Day? And do we look at this one video that shows, polling irregularities and ballots stuffed into the garbage, or we do look at another news source that says we called every state, and then at some point the states will certify and so it's sort of the epigenetics of epistemology. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, to the degree that I understand what epigenetics are, that they sort of turn on and turn off the genetic code there, and only some things actually get expressed. And so in some ways the genetic code is the hardware and the epigenetics are sort of the software, and they're turning things on and off. And that's what's happening. We're simply bombarded by all this information from our screens, and we have to filter it. And so it's in a sense our value hierarchies are internalized platforms already that dispose us to see two worlds. And that's where you get Scott Adams' two screens. And so that's at play. And then, of course, well, what do you wonder? Well, how have these value hierarchies been created? Well, they've been created because they've grown and grown and grown and grown, and every now and then we get a flipped, and so there's a red pill or a blue pill or a bread pill, or on and on and on, when in a sense the platform flips, but the platforms never fully flip, because we have memories, and we have institutions, and we have families, and we have relationships. And so back when there was really, in a sense, when there was a broad consensus and all of the meaning was made for you, and you sort of programmed the herd, as it were, well, now there's all these tiny little smaller herds, and now they're sort of competing with one another. And, well, what does that mean with respect to there's nothing to watch? Well, there's the mapped and the unmapped territory in us, and so, well, you've probably been consuming and consuming and consuming all of the channels that you consume until the point that, well, you're done watching Jordan Peterson videos because he never says anything new anymore. And the fact that he hasn't said anything really for 9 months means there's nothing new. And so you sort of have the end of the Truman Show, where how's it going to end? What's Truman going to do? And again, my favorite scene is with those two security guards, and then Truman walks off, and Christoph in the sky says, "End transmission," and beep. Everybody at home first looks at it, and then they grab the remote and they say, "What's next?" Well, our map territory, we've been, ingesting YouTube after YouTube after YouTube of people who are all high on our salience hierarchies and our tribal relationships and all our platform selves. And so, how many more outrage videos can I watch from the Weinsteins about the woke? Okay, yep. You hit that outrage button plenty, and it's kind of like, well, the button's getting tired of being pushed, and so you don't have to convince me that there's a problem with wokeness. I'm convinced. I don't need to see any more videos on it, and so then you just watch the food fight, and it's like, okay, I've watched the food fight. There we are. And so this collective cognition, which, of course, John, another fancy Vervaekean term, I feel bad I keep stealing John Vervaeke's language, but he's been so helpful with his giving up the language. So, this collective cognition that we're doing, it's just getting increasingly tribal. I think there's also right now a huge exhaustion of caring. Part of the reason Donald Trump was successful is that part of his skill was to dominate the news. And what it shouldn't have surprised me, but this, of course, if we have a news media whose dynamic is fundamentally commercial, you want to lead with whatever people will be fixated upon. And Donald Trump has managed for the last 6 years to really dominate and hold the attention of the nation. And with him being president, you had to cover him. But he can be exhausting. And now we have a pandemic. And I think there's just an exhaustion of caring. And, we've got political anxiety. Okay, well, depending on who you want to win or didn't want to win, we're nervous about political, and social instability. Well, some people want instability, and that makes us even more anxious because I think a lot of people who say they want instability, yeah, bring a certain degree of instability in your life and we'll see how much you want the status quo back again. So we've got political anxiety. We've got COVID anxiety. We've got financial anxiety because of all this. We've got social rest anxiety. We've got familial cohesion anxiety. People, of course, fighting within their families about these political things. Even if the mantra is small government, the degree to which politics is just eclipsing everything else in our life is actually the antithesis of the whole idea behind small government. Politics should be some fairly nerdy thing that is little ways far off from everybody else's life so that your agency in your life can be maximalized. That's the idea behind small government, but what if small government is so noisy it eclipses any other conversation in your world and starts disrupting your church patterns, your family patterns, your relational patterns, your work patterns? Now suddenly when you go to a restaurant, do you care what party the restaurateur voted for? Do you care, who the other people on your street voted for? Are you going to start taking names of who aligned with the other political party? Even if you're a small government activist, to the degree to which politics is infusing and colonizing all of the ideas of our life, that's not small government. Freedom should be freedom from politics, freedom from thinking about the president, freedom from the cares of these institutions. And so it's just exhaustion of caring. And then the political discourse goes, well, and on the woke side, if you're not anti-racist, you're racist. And well, what does it mean to be anti-racist? Well, and that gets tyrannical quickly. You've got to keep acknowledging your privilege, and you have to do this 24/7. And again, as someone who grew up in a conservative Calvinist tradition, this all looks very familiar because I've seen this on the religious front. So it's just an exhaustion of caring. And at some point, people just collapse in the chair and say, oh, spare me from it. And that on top of all the normal life anxiety of paying bills and managing your household and getting enough to eat and worrying about your insurance and the car won't start. And then, relationships with the neighbors or the spouse or the kids or the parents, on and on. And all of this with a daily onslaught of moral political demands. That's one of the real calamities that we've seen is the political is the moral, and it just keeps ratcheting up. And at some point it just hits a circuit breaker, and doesn't mean you don't have political ideas. It just means I don't want them running my life. And so then I ask people, what are you watching, or what? And they tell me things which are really interesting. One person in the meetup said, I'm watching engine rebuilding videos. And I already know how to rebuild engines. And in fact, when he drove here, he drove a car that I hadn't recognized. And he, like me, has kids. And so he has a number of cars. And I hadn't recognized that car. And it was a cool car. So I asked him about it. He says, yeah, it's a good car. But, it's a reliable car. And at this point in my life, I've rebuilt engines before, and I don't want to rebuild them anymore. I just want the car to run. And another member of the meetup talked about he was basically watching, basically life advice shows, sort of like advice columns. And people come in with their problems, and they say their problem on the air, and then the advice columnist gives them the answer to their problem, and zip, 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 zip. Problem solved in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Why do we like these very reliable videos right now? Well, they're sort of like little morality plays. And so we have these huge we have these huge problems in our lives that we can't resolve. And so we just want to see something resolved. We want to see the drain cleared. We want to see the wiring fixed. We want to see the car's engine turn over. We want to get the sense that we can address something in our life, fix it, resolve it, move on. And, well, the whole lot of things in your life you can't move on. And so when these things are pointed at you day in and day out, you just get exhausted. And so we have all these little morality plays, and you're not left either with an endless battle nor anxiety too close to home, but good guys and bad guys, clean narratives. And that tends to be what we retreat into. And, one of the things that I've noticed on Netflix and on Amazon is that, well, TV, they're always, TV networks are always fighting the last war, trying to anticipate the next war, trying to figure out what's going to be the next hot thing, of course. But they're doing that by almost always repeating what was hot last time and the cycle before, the cycle before. And a lot of these shows are these ongoing, you think about Breaking Bad, 5 seasons of watching someone come apart. And right now, with the anxiety that everyone's feeling, well, some people are going to watch that because they can forget their own anxieties by watching somebody else's anxieties. But for a lot of people, it's just too close to home. So they don't want the chattering voice who agrees with them and tells them what to think. And they don't want the ongoing drama of Tony Soprano trying to, figure out how to deal with all of his problems at home, his problems with the mob, all of those problems. They want something that's boom, 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 done. And actually, if you think, I'm just thinking about it now, a lot of the sitcoms that you saw in the 70s, problems wrapped up in a nice tidy bow in 18 minutes. And we see that. I think at some deep level, we're comforted by that. And we're reassured by that. Now, part of what I think we're seeing, and part of the reason I think YouTube is boring, is YouTube has been editing. And, Stefan Molyneux's gone. There's your little advice columnist with your sort of your clean, rather authoritarian, direct lines to, why are you mystified that, your sister being your girlfriend is a bad idea? Come on. And then you get a stern moral talking to. And, I'm always amazed at these kinds of shows because if you watch the show, you recognize that, yeah, if you're, $100,000 in debt and 400 pounds overweight, and if you call up Stefan Molyneux or someone like him, they're going to chew you out. So why do you call to be chewed out? Well, it's not unlike going to the kind of church that beats you up. And you think, well, why is it that it's all the people who expect to get beat up in church go to church to get beat up by the pastor, by him yelling at them and moralizing over them? Well, because in a sense, if they can't actually pull off the morality themselves, they get a little hit of self-righteousness, at least vicariously participating in the little morality play. I mean, we're complex like that. And so part of what's been happening as these micro medias, as these platforms get more and more important and grow larger and larger, well, now suddenly the larger moral nannies in the culture look and say, well, you've really got to get rid of those bad actors. And so, you cut off Alex Jones and you cut off Stefan Molyneux. And, well, why? And they think, well, this is the right way to go. Now, again, if you go back to my last video, part of what's deep in Protestantism and deep in atheism and very deep actually into the wokeness is very this imagination of directness. That, well, if more and more of our youth aren't sort of following the arc of history as we imagine it's supposed to go, YouTube must be to blame or Twitter must be to blame. And so let's get these people off the platforms. But what they don't realize is that sometimes you want to keep the clowns around. Why? Because they're clowns. You want to keep the clowns around because for a while you kind of get on the clown train and you ride the clown train and you go and you go and you go. But after you've been on it for a while, you realize, I can't ride this train anymore. And then you kind of step off. It's sort of like rumspring of the mind. That's this, so the Amish have this very strict, controlled way of life. But then when you become a young adult, they say, get out of the community and go out into the world and decide if you want to be an Amish person or not. because once you come back and commit, we need to know that you're down and you're going to conform and you're going to sign up for our little tyranny, because we don't want you, wobbly once you sign up. So go out and try it. And so the clowns are sort of like that. We had a little watch party on the Discord server with the Alex Jones, Joe Rogan video. And you want these guys around because, well, we've got these outliers. And this is where, again, Peugeot's stuff is so important, because you've got the center and you've got the fringe. You need to keep the fringe around. If you keep cutting off the fringe is going to manifest itself, just like you're going to need to sleep. And so if you keep cutting off the fringe, new fringe will emerge. Make your peace with the fringe. And, it's going to manifest itself, and some people are going to go out there, and you're going to lose some people to the fringe, but you're going to lose a little bit of people to the fringe if you at least have your entire ecosystem in some kind of balance and order. To the degree that you try to keep cutting off the fringe, well, then you keep basically making your whole system unstable. So we go to the fringe once again in many ways to recalibrate the center. You sort of know what a politician should look like when you watch Alex Jones, because you might think, I like watching Alex Jones, but when you put Alex Jones in charge, what do you get? You know what you're gonna get. So let Alex Jones be Alex Jones. Let Kanye be Kanye. Let Donald Trump be Donald Trump. They are what they are. Now, use your agency to decide. Do you want him to be president, or you do not want him to be president? Why or why not? How does that system go? This is the whole idea. And the more that the algorithms start trying to morally nanny things, well, that's sort of the end of the death of YouTube. And then suddenly you've given... it's like the old story when the son or the daughter brings a boyfriend or a girlfriend home, and you look at them, you think, this is not going to end well. Yeah, you try the direct approach and see how that goes. You might try the patient approach. And, if you've raised this child's probably going to figure some things out. You always lose some to the fringe, but for the most part, fringes are fringes because they're fringes. That's just the way it is. So if the mainstream micro platforms deplatform the hungry or the fringy to further out, well, suddenly folks are watching BitChute and they're switching Parler for Twitter, and on and on and on and on. This is what they're going to do. And, doesn't seem that now we used to have the mainstream media, now we have the dominant platforms. Doesn't seem like the dominant platforms have really figured this out yet. Why? Because, well, what are their algorithms shooting for? Well, it's interesting that these platforms, just like almost every other, even quasi-living thing we produce, the living thing we produce is, what does it try to do? It tries to maintain its own survival. That's what happens when you develop a corporation. That's what happens when you develop any kinds of institution. They try to guarantee their own survival, and almost always their efforts to guarantee their own survival undermine their future. And this is sort of what's happening with these mainstream platforms. And so we sort of wind up with one of my favorite lines out of a movie is from the movie The Sunshine State. Then it used to be on YouTube, but of course it probably violated copyright, so it's no longer available on YouTube. Is when they're getting out on a golf course, nature on a leash. In the beginning there was nothing. Out of this muck and the mangroves we created this. Nature on a leash. It was a golf course. Well, you can have the golf course, but the weeds keep growing and the alligators keep stumbling on, and at some point, nature will reassert itself. As human culture eclipses and colonizes the natural world, why do we hunger and preserve it? And of course, this was happening, quite a bit in the 19th century. The development of the national parks, John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt. What's with this? America on one hand felt the need to, civilize and colonize the Native Americans and the indigenous people, and at the same time they were glorifying them in sort of this weird way. And you see the same things happening right now with racial struggles. On one hand, you're sort of fetishizing the poor and fetishizing the outcast, and in that way sort of placing them in the middle. But what you're really doing is sort of colonizing them and telling them they can't be them. And I see this all the time with the homeless. The homeless act a certain way, and well, you can make them not homeless anymore, and then guess what? They won't be homeless, and they won't act that way again. So this is what we've been doing on a massive scale with respect to, just devouring, putting, turning fields into farms, and then farms into suburbs, and then suburbs into city. And this is what we've been doing. And then, well, why do we hunger for the natural rhythms of the world? Well, these rhythms recalibrate us, and that they're patterns larger than our own, and they're longer than our own. And we resist, and they resist our own meddling. They keep coming back. You can think of the themes of Jurassic Park. And this just shows that we need to get beyond ourselves to find an equilibrium again. We want a system that is beyond us. We want a system we can't colonize. And this gets into the specific, what C.S. Lewis calls the specific pleasure of the inferior. It's the dog before his master. It's our desire to be loved and possessed and devoured by one stronger and greater, more beautiful and better than ourselves. And that's part of the reason we have this enduring love for nature, but suddenly we realize, but then we're out of control. That's a big part of, I think, what went on with the Jordan Peterson wave. And one of the first things I thought of when I heard this meetup group. Now, we've been meeting together. We started in January 2018, and this coming January will be our 3-year anniversary. And, we've noticed, and we talked about this at our last meeting, are our conversations getting stale? Now, our meetups have been smaller because we've just sort of, a lot of people, it's just like church, really, in some ways. Only certain temperaments of our meetups will show, and we're not publicizing it, so we're not opening the doors, and we try to meet outside, yada, yada, yada. But so I listened to all these people that were just captivated by Jordan Peterson, but then and we were talking about the book tour, and we all pretty much agreed once, and some of us heard 3 or 4 of those book tour talks live, and pretty much once you went to one, you had seen the show. That was it. It was map territory. It had gotten decadent. And when I talked about the fact that part of the reason long-term churches have focused on keep coming back to the Bible, because the Bible in that sense, because in a sense you put the Bible on the top of your hierarchy, that's sort of a way of making it both sovereign and wild. And so then when you preach, you keep going back to the Bible as your sovereign and as something that's wild, and that then, sort of in a shamanic way, rejiggers you and keeps what you're doing fresh, which is why I think, frankly, the only way Jordan Peterson has a hope of staying fresh and having another wave is if he actually uses the Bible. We'll see, what he's able to pull off, and we'll see what comes, because as every preacher I know and every church planter I know, you go out and you give it your best shot, and you see what happens. You're not in control of what happens. The world is big and you are small. And so, it was so interesting that a group that 2-3 years ago where it was having this revelatory experience on YouTube, now just heard that, done this, heard that, this is boring. What about that? This no longer keeps my interest. Now, on one hand, that no longer keeping your interest can be a sign of you, that in some ways boring people get bored. In other ways, it's also a sign of something else. In almost everything in life is, the first draft is true, but there are more drafts that are there. And so I still find, video comments on Jordan Peterson's video. I'm deeply thankful to the man for saving me. And of course, it was comments like that drew my attention early on. And the tide is still moving. Again, now Jonathan Peugeot's conversation with Carl Benjamin is on Jonathan's channel, and I listened to that conversation and I thought, And, John Vervaeke and the meaning crisis. I mean, the tide, the surge beneath the Jordan Peterson wave was very real, and that surge is still coming up. And I think, in fact, that is tied to this boredom with YouTube and with Netflix and with the platforms and with the algorithms and the hunger for the wild. Now that hunger for the wild perhaps in some communities means they want anarchy because they want to get out of the patterns. They want to tear down the patterns. And, well, the difficulty is that anarchy is its own pattern, and it's pretty well established what happens when you tear down the structures. You just get something more natural, more bestial. The strong take the weak. And again, I've recommended before reading Timothy Snyder's Black Earth, because he makes the assertion that in the whole wave between Nazis versus communists imagine we need to establish a divine state, and then that divinity will somehow pass away. The Nazis are much more shorter term. Well, we'll use the state to sort of attack statism itself and to reduce us all to our natural ways so that, well, then the strong will take the weak. And it's a highly green, highly naturalistic vision of the good that the Nazis had. And it was also extremely tyrannical. And, most of us, as Tom Holland says, well, we don't need the devil anymore. We have the Nazis. So the tide's still moving in, and we wait for the wild to break in, but it's a certain kind of wild we want. We want it wild, but we want it wild good, not wild evil. And we want a degree of chaos, but we want the chaos to somehow be within a range that says this chaos, because chaos is always fear of loss, but potential for growth. And so we want the chaos to be tinged with hope. And knowing there's something out there beyond the pale that can bring hope, refresh, new life. But still, and so when I listen to Carl Benjamin talk about church, well, on one hand, he doesn't see any potential in church. It's not wild enough, which is why he won't go. And I think this is part of the reason Kanye's Sunday services, rather than these Sunday assemblies done by atheists. Okay, we're going to sing the Beatles. Okay, we're going to sing Journey. Okay, you're going to trot out some artwork from the Renaissance or some idea, and we won't say the word God, and that will somehow... There's a reason that doesn't work. It's not wild enough. So when Kanye, who is, in Pajoian terms a clown, starts a Sunday service, then suddenly all the Hollywood stars want to be there. Well, why? Well, because it's going to be wild. And this is actually part of the fetishization of African Americans in our culture, because we do fetishize them. And notice how with Bruce Almighty, God is black. And look at the Shack. Oprah is God. Well, why? Because we fetishize the different. We fetishize the strange. We fetishize the fringe, because we're aware that the potentiality and the promise is beyond our grasp. And so, well, Carl Benjamin's right there at the point. Well, I don't see any potential, especially in the churches that I've known, but something in my imagination says I should go out there and find something church-like. But I'm anxious about it. I don't want it to be too out of control, but it needs to be out of control. And again, read C.S. Lewis's chapter on pantheism, because nature needs to be alive, but nature is red in tooth and claw. I need to know that there's hope and promise in that chaotic potentiality. And that sort of brings me to C.S. Lewis's imagery of Aslan. And here at the end of, I think this was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the movie version, that little girl that played Lucy was so cute. And Tumnus the fawn, Lewis starts this. He had this vision about a fawn and a lamppost, a fawn with an umbrella. That was Lewis's vision. And he started writing a children's book, started with the fawn and the children. And Lewis said basically once Aslan gambled into the story, the whole story started to write itself. Well, why is Aslan not a tame lion? Why doesn't Aslan stay for the coronation party of the 4 chairs in Cair Paravel? Why doesn't Aslan stay? Why does Aslan slowly walk off into the sunset? And Lucy's like, well, why isn't Aslan staying? Because Aslan's not a tame lion. He's a good lion, not a tame lion. And if you read The Horse and His Boy, the lion will take a chunk out of you now and then. It is not the case that those teeth and that claws aren't worth anything. They're for something. And there's a reason that when he roars, you run away and hide and you pray to the thing that might just kill you. That's the religion we want. That's the religion we need, and the reason that there's nothing good to watch on YouTube falls into this matrix. So that's why YouTube is boring, because it's increasingly not wild. And we need the wild. We long for the wild. It has to be beyond the pale, but yeah, it will be dangerous. Yeah, you don't know what will happen when you get there. Yeah, it'll be a mess and there'll be moments of despair, but, to invoke Tolkien, Bilbo first finds the dwarves at his door in The Hobbit a royal nuisance, and they all eat there and, mess up his house and do all of that. And then they go off, and the old Took inside of him stirs, and he goes off on this adventure, which is a very non-Hobbit thing to do. Well, some of these atheist hobbits are getting a taste of what they think and what they need, and well, they thought that this world of reason would be enough, and, they watch Star Trek, and, well, this is what will happen, and, well, Dostoevsky and Life from the Underground, Dostoevsky was right. We want the wild. We need the wild. And in some ways, I think part of the reason for the Jordan Peterson wave was he was outside the script. He was wild, and something drew us. And so the lamb is the lion, and the lion is the lamb. You hear the lion, and you see the lamb. And so he's not a tame lion, but I think that's what our heart is longing for, even in the midst of these anxieties and cares. So I think, yeah, that's why YouTube's boring.